Tune Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @TuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@tunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from The National on Friday the 16th of June 2023, from the Politics section. No plans to recoup taxpayers' cash spent on Boris Johnson's legal fees. This article is written by Zander Eliards. Top figures within the SNP have stepped up calls for Boris Johnson's resignation honours list to be torn up, and for the disgraced former Prime Minister to repay the public money spent on his legal defence. Stephen Flynn, the SNP's leader at Westminster, said the report from the Privileges Committee, which would have recommended Johnson be given a 90-day suspension from the Commons, meant that there were actions which now had to be taken. Flynn said, "I think this report confirms what most of us already know, that Boris Johnson is a liar and that he has repeatedly lied not just to the public but also to the Parliament too. This is an extremely serious matter, but there's a few things that need to happen now as well. The legal costs, which the public have paid for, need to be recouped from Mr Johnson. The allowance to which he is entitled as a former Prime Minister, that needs to be removed, and of course his honours list as a disgraced former Prime Minister has to be put in the bin." In May, it emerged that taxpayers would be forced to pay a £245,000 bill for Johnson's legal fees as he tried to defend himself over the Partygate scandal. The same month, it was reported that Johnson had spent £3.8 million on a 9-bedroom mansion in Oxfordshire. But the UK government claimed it had footed the bill for the former Tory leader's legal fees, and there were no plans to look to recoup the money. The SNP's leader in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, says Boris Johnson repeatedly lied and has disgraced the office that he holds. The legal costs, which the public have paid for, need to be recouped. Flynn's predecessor as SNP Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, echoed the call. He wrote on Twitter, "With the Privilege Committee having reported, Sunak should show leadership and make sure that Boris Johnson resignation honours are revoked." He added, "The former PM has gone in disgrace. His tainted honours list must not be allowed to stand." And Keith Brown, SNP's deputy leader, said, "The House of Lords undermines the UK's claim to be a democracy. Johnson's dishonours list undermines the elected element of the UK Parliament. At the very least, Johnson's list should be torn up." Brown also shared comment from Katie Loudon, the SNP's candidate in any by-election called in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which, said Flynn, was bang on the money. "He should be stripped of all and any of ex-PM benefits, and the public should not be liable for his legal costs," Loudon said. But the UK government has insisted that allowing former Prime Minister's resignation honours lists to stand was a long-standing convention that Rishi Sunak was not keen to change. There is no convention governing what should happen in Johnson's case, however, as he is the first Prime Minister to have been found to have repeatedly lied to Parliament. The former Tory leader resigned as an MP with immediate effect after seeing the draft conclusions of the report late last week. His ally, Nigel Adams, also resigned, and Nadine Dorries made a show of saying she would. However, the former Culture Secretary has since clung on to her parliamentary seat. Dorries and Adams were both left off Johnson's honours list when it was published. At PMQs on Wednesday, Labour leader Keir Starmer said, "The truth is, for all his tough talk after the event, the Prime Minister did sign off the honours list. That means that those who threw a Downing Street party the night before the late Queen sat alone at her husband's funeral will now receive awards from the King. If he is so tough, why didn't he block it?" The Prime Minister replied, "I and the government followed due process and convention. Prime Ministers of both parties have always upheld the convention of non-interference on political honours. My predecessors may not have agreed with Labour's choices of Tom Watson or Shami Chakravarti, but the same precedent stood then as it does now. And I'd expect a knight like him to understand that." Starmer said honours should be for public service, not Tory cronies, telling the Commons, "Isn't this the case? He was too weak to block Johnson's list, and that also means that those who spent their time helping cover up Johnson's law-breaking are rewarded by becoming lawmakers for the rest of their lives." That article was written by Zander Eliades. This is from The National on Friday the 16th of June 2023, from the news section. First wildcats released into cairngorms in Nature Scott-backed project. This article is written by Aaron Burns-Lees. More than 20 Scottish wildcats have been released into the cairngorms as a years-in-the-making project reaches a landmark milestone. The Nature Scott approved trial is the first ever conservation translocation of wildcats in Britain. The Saving Wildcats Partnership, led by the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, RZSS, has so far released 22 cats into undisclosed locations within the Cairngorms Connect landscape of the Cairngorms National Park. The cats will be monitored using GPS radio collars to assess their progress. Scotland's wildcat population is critically endangered, and the programme will seek to reintroduce approximately 60 wildcats to the natural landscape over the next 3 years. It is envisioned that approximately 20 cats will also be released in 2024 and 2025 from the Conservation Breeding for Release Centre. The cats bred for release are not available for public viewing to help them prepare for life in the wild. The project, which has undertaken widespread engagement with local communities, has drawn on global conservation and scientific expertise to further understanding of wildcat ecology and behaviour. David Field, chair of the Saving Wildcats Project Board and CEO of the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, said, "We are delighted that the Saving Wildcats Partnership has taken this historic step towards securing a future for the species in Scotland. The time is now to give the Highland tiger the best chance of survival, and I am thankful for the work of our team members, partners and supporters in making this happen. I am also particularly grateful for the support of our local community in the Cairngorms, as, without their engagement, we would not have reached this exciting milestone." Lorna Slater, Minister for Green Skills, the Circular Economy and Biodiversity, said, "The Scottish wildcat is a native species, and yet its very existence is under threat. This announcement is welcome news and is an important step in ensuring the survival of the species. Reversing the dramatic losses in nature that we have seen in recent times is one of the defining challenges that our country faces. The Scottish Government remains committed to this fight and is actively working towards protecting and restoring our natural environment and the animals that rely upon it. I'd like to thank everyone that has been involved for their incredible hard work that has got us to this position. I look forward to seeing the progress of the wildcats as they settle into their new home in Scotland's iconic Cairngorms National Park." Thomas MacDonald, Director of Conservation for Wildland Limited, on behalf of Cairngorms Connect, said, "It's fantastic that Cairngorms Connect have been selected as a suitable release site for these critically endangered cats, and it is the best possible reward for the whole team at Wildland, along with the Cairngorms Connect partnership, to receive such recognition for all the hard work involved during the first 20 years we have been restoring our precious landscape. The Saving Wildcats team have been a pleasure to work with, and we wish the cats every success in becoming an integral part of the wild ecosystem and our futures. The cats were born in a purpose-built off-show conservation breeding for release centre based at Highland Wildlife Park near Aviemore in 2022. Despite lengthy preparations ahead of the first release, Cairngorms Connect noted that one of the most difficult aspects of any conservation translocation is predicting how the animal will respond to being released. Dr. Helen Sen, project lead and head of science and conservation programmes for the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, said, "We hope that this project will pave the way for the full recovery of Scotland's last remaining native cat species. Unfortunately, life is tough for wild carnivores, and the sad reality is that some of the wild cats that we release will not survive due to threats such as road traffic. Their survival is contingent on their individual behaviour in a new environment." While the Saving Wildcats team have made every effort to prepare the wildcats by moving them into large pre-release enclosures which support natural development, informed by other successful carnivore recovery projects such as Iberian lynx in Spain and Portugal, they cannot ultimately control how the cats will react. However, we also know that inaction will result in extinction. As human activity is responsible for the wildcat's decline, we have a responsibility to take action now. Everything we learn from this closely monitored first trial release will help inform future releases. The project is funded with a contribution of the LIFE programme of the European Union and other partners and organisations. Further updates from the project are expected to be issued at the end of the summer release period. That article was written by Aaron Burns-Lees. This is from The National on Friday the 16th of June 2023, from the Politics section. Humza Yousaf rejects claims of police and media collusion in SNP probe. This article is written by Steph Braun. Humza Yousaf has said he does not believe there has been collusion between the police and media during the investigation into the SNP's finances. The First Minister was speaking after one of his backbench MSPs accused the press of making a big play of the arrest of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. She was questioned by officers from Police Scotland on Sunday as part of Operation Branchform, which is looking into what happened to money raised by the party for a second independence referendum campaign. Sturgeon was released without charge, pending further investigation on Sunday evening. SNP MSP James Dornan claimed the police and media seem to have some kind of collusion about making sure that the media are in attendance when the slightest thing happens. Police Scotland has denied the accusation, with a spokesperson for the force saying, "Any suggestion that the media were informed in advance of an arrest is untrue." Asked about Dornan's comments by journalists at Holyrood on Thursday, Yousaf said, "I don't believe that." He said he would not comment further on a live investigation. With reports having suggested Yousaf told SNP MSPs to quit the party if they do not back his decision to refrain from suspending Sturgeon, he added, "I've made it clear to the MSPs, and they are all united behind the fact that if you are advancing the cause of independence, then we want you to be part of the group." Yousaf said he has not spoken to Sturgeon since she was arrested, with the former First Minister having released a statement afterwards, in which she insisted, beyond doubt, that she is innocent of any wrongdoing. She became the third high-profile SNP politician to be arrested in connection with alleged irregularities in the party's finances, after complaints were raised almost 2 years ago. Peter Murrell, who is the SNP's former chief executive and Sturgeon's husband, plus former SNP treasurer Colin Beattie, have both also been arrested and questioned by police before being released without charge pending further investigation. And that article was written by Steph Braun. This is from The National on Friday the 16th of June 2023, from the news section. ScotRail ticket price increase is reckless, say unions. This article is written by Laura Pollack. Unions have hit out at the Scottish Government's reckless decision to increase ScotRail ticket prices. Train Drivers Union ASLEF shared an email from ScotRail's head of retail confirming fares will rise by 4.8% next month, excluding season and flexi tickets. The change will come into effect on July the 3rd. ScotRail came into public ownership in April last year. ASLEF Scotland organiser Kevin Lindsay said, "The Scottish Government's decision to increase ScotRail ticket prices is a reckless one that threatens the progress of getting Scotland's railways back on track. To increase ticket prices during a cost of living crisis risks forcing more passengers off of trains rather than getting them on board with rail travel. This is being done in the face of all the evidence which shows we need to shift more transport from road to rail in response to the climate emergency. The new Transport Minister's immediate task must be to halt these fare hikes and urgently deliver the fare freeze the First Minister committed to months ago." The email from ScotRail head of retail, Claire Dickey, acknowledges that fare increases will be disappointing for some customers, but said the revenue is essential to allow it to run a service which is safe, reliable, green and reduces the burden on taxpayers. It states, "Since January 2022, rail fares on ScotRail services have been frozen, which was an important measure to attract passengers back to the railway after the pandemic and provide support during the cost of living crisis. That was the correct decision at the time, but it did have a serious impact on ScotRail's financial sustainability, given a significant amount of our income comes from passenger revenue. Today, the Scottish Government, which decides the level at which ticket prices should be set, has confirmed that ScotRail fares will be increasing by 4.8%. This excludes season and flexi tickets, which remain frozen at current prices, ensuring that those who use rail frequently are encouraged to continue. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association, TSSA, union, which represents members in the management, clerical, supervisor, station and engineering grades within ScotRail, also criticised the decision to increase fares. TSSA organiser for ScotRail, Gary Kelly, said, "This announcement is bad news for anyone hoping to ditch the car this summer. Increasing rail fares is only going to put people off travelling by train in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The SNP like to talk the talk about net zero targets, but they can't walk the walk. We need a fares freeze for everyone if we want to get serious about greening the economy and a public railway run in the public interest. The first act of the incoming Transport Secretary, Mari McCallan, should be to scrap this increase immediately." McCallan said, "The Scottish Government rightly made the decision to freeze fares as part of its response to the cost of living crisis. While this has now remained in place for around 18 months, it is simply no longer sustainable. From July the 3rd, 2023, ScotRail fares will increase by 4.8%, compared to 5.9% fares rise across the rest of Great Britain, current RPI of 8.7% and the August 2022 RPI rate of 12.3%. She added, "This below-inflation increase means fares remain, on average, lower than across the rest of Great Britain. We know that any increase is unwelcome for passengers, therefore we have kept the rise as low as possible to maintain the attractiveness and affordability of rail as a travel option. That article was written by Laura Pollock.
From the National, Monday 19 June 2023, from the Politics section, David Warburton formally quits as MP over cocaine and harassment probe. Report by political reporter Hamish Morrison. David Warburton has formally quit as an MP after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine use. The decision means Rishi Sunak faces another potentially difficult by-election in the Somerton and Frome seat vacated by the former Tory MP. Warburton's exit from the Commons was confirmed by the Treasury following his appointment as steward and bailiff of the Manor of Norstead, one of the procedural routes for an MP to quit. In an interview with the Mail on Sunday, Warburton admitted to taking cocaine after drinking tons of incredibly potent Japanese whiskey, but denied claims he harassed a female political aide in his Westminster flat. His resignation will trigger an electoral battle in his Somerset constituency, adding to the problems faced by the Prime Minister, who faces at least 2 other by-elections after the resignations of Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams. Sunak will face a 4th if Nadine Dorries follows through on her threat to quit after she was denied a peerage. He took the seat from the Liberal Democrats in 2015 and had a 19,213 majority. When he announced his resignation on Saturday, Warburton hit out at the investigation conducted by Parliament's Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, ICGS, claiming he had been denied a fair hearing. In his resignation letter, he said he had been left with no choice that would provoke the upheaval of a by-election, adding, "It is my hope that, in so doing, I can freely illuminate the methods of an oversight system not fit for purpose, so that friends and colleagues in the House can see the perverted process by which their own judgment may at any time be freighted." A House of Commons spokesman said, "Parliament remains absolutely committed to the ICGS. It is there to ensure that all complaints are dealt with in a manner that is fair, thorough, independent and efficient, offering support to all parties. The target to reduce the length of investigations must always be balanced against the paramount requirement to ensure that investigations are rigorous and robust. The scheme always seeks to learn from cases and is mindful of the impact investigations may have on those involved." The spokesman refused to be drawn on Warburton's specific case, as confidentiality requirements meant we cannot provide any information on any complaints or cases, including whether or not a complaint has been received. And that report was by Hamish Morrison. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023. From the Politics section, Labour press conference descends into farce as media bus gets lost. Report by political reporter Hamish Morrison. Labour were left red-faced after the prelude to a major press conference descended into farce. Journalists said the party had originally arranged for a green hydrogen bus to ferry the media to Leith for Keir Starmer's speech on Labour's new energy policies, but that it was swapped at the last minute for a diesel model. Andy Phillip, the head of politics at publisher DC Thomson, said, "An auspicious start as the hydrogen bus laid on to the Labour energy event in Edinburgh is switched for a diesel one." Severin Carroll, the Guardian Scotland editor, tweeted a picture of the bus, saying the model was not a hydrogen-powered vehicle. Things got even worse when the bus became lost on the way to the venue, with a journalist having to give directions to the harried driver. Carell tweeted, "Now the bus is lost. We are now pointing west down Ferry Road. The venue is near the shore in Leith Docks." He added, "A Daily Mail reporter is now directing the Labour diesel bus to the venue." Phillips said the driver had to perform a 3-point turn on Ferry Road before the press pack arrived at the venue. He tweeted, "Update from the road is bus now lost in Leith, hilariously. Going round in circles, if you will." Luckily, an intrepid Edinburgh-based reporter knows the way and is currently directing the driver, who is having a mare. Had an excellent view of the new electric tram line from the city centre though. Success. 45 minutes in a 3-point turn on Ferry Road, performed by a passing Lothian bus driver. We have been driven down the road to the Labour event. Once the press pack arrived at the venue, Starmer delivered a speech on Labour's plans to meet net zero. He argued for continued use of fossil fuels while banning new North Sea oil and gas exploration, and said the headquarters of a proposed new public energy company would be in Scotland. Starmer said, "If we wait until the North Sea oil and gas runs out, the opportunities this change can bring for Scotland and your community will pass us by, and that would be a historic mistake. An error for the future of Scotland, as big as the Thatcher government closing the coal mines, while fritting away the opportunity of the North Sea." And that report was by political reporter Hamish Morrison. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023, from the politics section. Liz Truss, comparisons with lettuce were puerile. Report by Adam Robertson. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss has said that an experiment to discover if a lettuce could last longer than her time in office was puerile. The Daily Star's lettuce became a viral sensation during Truss's short time in office, as she resigned after just 6 weeks as PM. It meant that the vegetable won the battle between the two, as Truss stepped down after the UK economy crashed due to a disastrous mini-budget. Many across the UK are still feeling the effects of her economic policies, even though they were reversed in a matter of weeks. Speaking at a News Exchange journalism conference in Dublin, Truss was asked if she could see the funny side of the Star's Lizzie Lettuce campaign. She replied, "I don't think it's funny, I just think it's puerile." Truss also criticised the press and the manner in which it reported on politics, saying it was a bit playground when there are really serious issues going on. "I think that the British media are known throughout the world for being particularly vociferous, and I don't think they're particularly deferential to politicians. It's frustrating because I came into politics because I wanted to change the country. I want to push particular ideas, and it's frustrating when you get diverted into a discussion of what hat you're wearing, or whether you like photographs, all this other stuff, rather than one of the crucial issues that were affecting Britain, Europe, Ireland and the US. She added, "I do sometimes think politics is treated as a branch of the entertainment industry. Who's up? Who's down? Who says what about who? It's a bit playground when there are really serious issues going on." And that report was by Adam Robertson. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023, from the news section. Sudden heat increases recorded in seas on Scotland's east coast. Report by Laura Pollock. Global sea surface temperatures in April and May were the highest on record, with some of the most intense heat increases on Earth recorded in seas around the UK and Ireland. Analysis from the Met Office and the European Space Agency shows water temperatures as much as 3 to 4 degrees above the average for this time of year. The sea is notably warmer off the east coast of the UK, from Durham to Aberdeen, as well as the northwest of Ireland. The intense heat can sometimes kill sea life on a huge scale. Marine heatwaves are associated with human-caused climate change, extreme weather, and less understood natural factors. The globe has felt extreme heatwaves this year, with high temperatures fueling wildfires in Canada blanketing Northern America, Asia, China. Meanwhile, parts of Siberia have also been affected by the global heatwave. Climate change caused by human emissions, combined with natural phenomena like El Nino, have pushed up ocean temperatures during the spring to a level never before seen since records began in 1850. Scientists are expecting more records to be broken as the summer advances. The North Atlantic temperature in May was around 1.25 degrees Celsius above the 1961 to 1990 average, the highest anomaly for any month on record. Antarctic sea ice is also exceptionally low, the lowest on record for this date by a wide margin, the Met Office said. El Niño and its counterpart La Niña cycle every few years in the tropical eastern Pacific and produce a warming and cooling effect respectively on the world's oceans and atmosphere. US meteorologists said last week that El Niño has now begun, characterised by a 0.5 degrees Celsius rise above the long-term average temperature in the tropical eastern Pacific. Professor Albert Klein-Tank, head of the Met Office Hadley Centre, said, "Typically, airborne dust from the Sahara helps to cool this region by blocking and reflecting some of the sun's energy. But weaker than average winds have reduced the extent of dust in the region's atmosphere, potentially leading to higher temperatures. Additionally, lighter than usual trade winds could be playing a role. All of these elements are part of natural variation within the climate system, which are coming together to elevate sea surface temperatures to higher levels. It is not believed that these factors represent a climate change-induced tipping point that produces runaway temperatures. However, they will add to climate and weather impacts this year. Meteorologists are also investigating the influence of the warm phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation since 2020, reduced emissions from shipping and persistent easterly winds from land warming the sea surface. The Met Office predicts there will be an above average number of hurricanes this season because of the warming in the North Atlantic. Despite that, numbers usually falling during El Niño periods because wind shear blows them apart before they can properly form. Julian Hemming, a tropical cyclone expert with the Met Office, said, "We are getting indications from models of an Atlantic tropical storm development east of the Caribbean by the middle of next week. This would be highly unusual in this area so early in the season. June storms normally form further west in the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico. The high sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic would likely be one of the main factors if this development did happen next week. El Niño could also be contributing to the Antarctic sea ice record lows this year, along with the southern annular mode, which affects winds in the southern hemisphere, and human-driven climate change." Dr. Ed Blockley, lead of the Polar Climate Group at the Met Office, said, "Antarctic sea ice has been at very low levels since November 2016. This year, we have seen Antarctic sea ice shrink to a record low point for the time of year, following a second successive annual record minimum sea ice extent in February." In the articles by Laura Pollock. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023, from the comment section. "Don't expect Douglas Ross to have any principles on Partygate." By Steph Payton, columnist. You could almost feel sorry for the Scottish Conservatives during this trying time, if not for their commitment to terminal obstructionism in the Scottish Parliament. Having spent the past number of years dodging any real policy commitments beyond no surrender, no referendum, even in local council elections where it couldn't be less relevant, Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross is now facing the consequences of putting dogmatic unionism above accountability. If ever there was a day that it would be politically expedient to create a little distance from our betters in London, this would be it for the Scottish Conservatives. Though to do so would be to undermine the message of a rigid subservience to Westminster that remains central to the party. While Ross has talked up his willingness to steadfastly stand up to the big boys of Whitehall in the past, his time as leader of the Scottish Conservatives is better defined as an elaborate game of political hokey-cokey. He resigned from Johnson's government over Dominic Cummings, continuing on as an advisor to the PM after breaking lockdown rules, then immediately parachuted into leading the Scottish Conservatives at his minister's pleasure. He submitted a letter of no confidence in Boris Johnson to the 1922 committee, then withdrew it. Part-time MP, part-time MSP, part-time referee, in, out, shake it all about. Frankly, it's surprising he isn't more liked within the Conservative Party, given their apparent love for party games. Which really brings us to that video. You'll find coverage of the fallout in today's National. You've probably seen the clip, and if you, like me, felt it too, a hard little ball of anger at the total contempt with which the Conservatives have treated all of us through the pandemic and beyond. It's one thing to know how the Tories behaved during lockdown, while we were isolated and alone, caring for the well-being of others. But it's another thing to see their reckless disregard in full colour. And that's only what was recorded. Who knows the full extent of what went on behind the closed doors of Downing Street? For me, it wasn't the questionable dancing, nor fashion choices, that particularly left a mark, though honestly, somebody should have a word. It was the smirking contempt as one guest laughed about bending the rules that made it wholly clear that this was not a mistake. Not so much bending the rules as breaking them like your old shatter-resistant school ruler, twanged between two back-to-back desks until it would finally give way with a sharp snap. This was a clear and conscious decision. It's representative of the culture of superiority that seeps from Westminster, the sneering, derision of the upper class, and the British exceptionalism that has scorched the world through centuries. This is what the Scottish Conservatives believe best represents us. This culture, this party, all of it superior to holding the political power to make change in Scotland ourselves. It's a hard sell for Douglas Ross, yet he seems desperate still to play the ticket out. Come one, come all, and see what you could have if you'll only back Britain. Marvel at the legacies of her towering leaders. See Boris Johnson, disgraced and spiteful. And there, Liz Truss, the human personification of shit hitting the fan. Over in an instant, but with a lot of cleaning up still to do. And now Rishi Sunak, whose reckless, uninspired government cares more for stoking a right-wing culture war than fixing the mess of his predecessors. If Ross didn't seem so keen to parrot the same rhetoric himself, I'd have thought he may be feeling especially sorry for himself to be associated with such a carnival of cruelty. But no, he's still trying to sell his tickets for the front row. It's true that, in tying themselves so thoroughly to the case for independence, the SNP risked the future of the Yes movement, weaving their own fate into that of the case for leaving the UK, and setting off on our own path. But the same is true also for that particular brand of unionism that is most associated within the Conservative Party, and which has come most to define the No campaign. That's not so different from 2014, really. The No campaign seemed far more rooted in conservatism and David Cameron's party than that of Labour or the Lib Dems, even if Alistair Darling was, on the face of it, leading the charge. It wasn't until very close to the end of the summer of 2014 that the case from Solidarity really took the foreground. And since, it has taken a backseat once more to an aggressive unionism that mirrors the Conservative Party's own descent into increasingly illiberal and intolerant thinking. The Conservatives want to sell us their contempt. Well, I'm not buying tickets to that show. We all deserve better. And that was a comment piece by Steph Payton. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023. From the Culture section, review. Banksy's Glasgow exhibition cements his position in art history. Report by Mark Brown. Who says crime doesn't pay? In his quarter-century career as a graffiti artist, Banksy, whose first solo show in 14 years opened at the Gallery of Modern Art in Glasgow yesterday, has managed to transform himself from unknown vandal to the most successful artist of the public space since Keith Haring. Indeed, the choice of the Gallery of Modern Art as a debut venue for the show is, appropriately, connected to another example of transgression transmuted into art. Banksy opted for the Gallery of Modern Art because his favourite work of art, The Duke, Glasgow's famous equestrian statue of the Duke of Wellington, with a traffic cone placed, permanently and satirically, on his head, sits immediately outside the gallery's front door. As many Glaswegians will tell you, in the early years of this public art piss take, the authorities used to remove the cone. However, so tenaciously quickly was the comedy hat replaced by pranksters that the great and the good had to give up, eventually adopting the image as a signature of the city. Indeed, pop into the Gallery of Modern Art shop and you can buy all manner of cards, frigged magnets and coasters emblazoned with pictures of the Iron Duke looking very silly. However, the political significance of opening the show at the Gallery of Modern Art goes deeper than the obvious similarity between the satirised statue and Banksy's own work. Prior to its current function, this grand building was the Royal Exchange, where traders dealt in commodities. Even more ironically, it was initially built as the home of the tobacco baron and slave owner William Cunningham. All of which makes the gallery the perfect place to display works of anti-racist art, such as the first draft of the Union flag stab vest that Banksy made for Stormy's iconic appearance at Glastonbury in 2019. This prototype, which is exhibited alongside a short video of Stormzy delighting in the item when he received it, was ultimately set aside by Banksy for being too patriotic in its reference to the flag. In the end, he went with the powerful white and black design that was adopted so enthusiastically by the rapper. The anti-racist theme is a strong one throughout the show. The artist has recreated the image that he famously painted on an external wall of the Barbican Arts Centre in London ahead of an exhibition of the work of African-American artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. In this piece, one of Basquiat's figures, a highly stylised pop art representation of a black boy, is stopped and searched by two cops. One finds this kind of melding of comic and political intent throughout the show. Another case in point is the image of archetypal spies listening in on a real telephone call box. Originally painted in Cheltenham, home of GCHQ, the UK government's intelligence and security facility, it makes for an artwork that is as neatly satirical as it is accessible. Of course, in these days of so-called culture wars, in which right-wingers on both sides of the Atlantic, from Nadine Dorries to Ron DeSantis, seek to distract us from food banks and homelessness by pointing towards chosen pronouns and children's entertainers who dare to be drag queens, Banksy is a target of the ire of many of the anti-woke brigade. Indeed, many conservative commentators sneer at the supposed hypocrisy of the artist being both left-wing and commercially successful. Predictably enough, he cares not a jot about such criticism. In the room dedicated to his political placards and the like, Banksy is quoted as saying, "I've always felt it important to stand up for what you believe, especially if there's a chance that doing so might get your art in the newspapers." It's weird, of course, to be viewing Banksy's work in an art gallery. As he says himself, graffiti is essentially art made to be viewed from a moving vehicle. Yet, this beautifully presented exhibition, in which one wends its way through 25 years of the artist's impressive oeuvre, succeeds in giving a strong sense of Banksy's methods and his personal artistic history. You can take or leave recreations of his studio, complete, I'm told, with his actual desk, and his teenage bedroom in Bristol, resplendent with posters of the specials. However, it's difficult not to be fascinated by the exhibit showing us how he created his famous self-destructing picture frame. Here, we can see the hardware that enabled him to shred his picture Girl with Balloon just seconds after it was auctioned for £1 million at Sotheby's in London in 2018. Sharply political, as distinctive as the work of Warhol or Haring, and, very often, laugh out loud funny, Banksy is one of the great popular artists of modern times. A fact of which this excellent show attests brilliantly. Banksy, cut and run, 25 years hard labour, is at the Gallery of Modern Art, Glasgow, until the 28th of August. www.glasgowlife.org.uk. And that report was by Mark Brown. From the National, Monday the 19th of June 2023, from the Culture section. Elton John spends over £600 at Glasgow takeaway after Hydro gig. Report by Rebecca Newlands. A Glasgow restaurant was sent a huge takeaway order apparently for Elton John. The team at Denison Barbecue had an order placed with them over the weekend, and it is understood that it was for the Crocodile Rock singer and his team. Staff at the East End Takeaway shared a photo of a receipt with the order under the name Elton John. The Rocketman's order consisted of 25 barbecue pork buns, 25 barbecue brisket buns, 4 veggie stacks, a vegan burger, 6 chicken burgers, and 10 portions of garlic fries, understood to be worth over £600. The 76-year-old performed at the City's Hydro on Saturday and Sunday as part of his Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, his final ever arena tour. Sir Elton wowed crowds with popular hits including Benny and the Jets, I'm Still Standing, and I guess that's why they call it the Blues. And that report was by Rebecca Newlands.
From The National, Tuesday the 20th of June 2023, from the news section. Hamza Yousaf laughs off Sky News question about standing down, by Adam Robertson. Hamza Yousaf laughed off a question from Sky News about whether or not he would stand down after the next general election, depending on the result. During an interview with Sky News on Tuesday morning, the First Minister was asked if he would stand down should Labour take half of the SNP seats at the next Westminster election. In response to the question, Yousaf laughed and replied, "It's incredible. I've been in the job for 3 months. That must be a record for somebody asking me if I'll stand down, and not a single ballot has been cast." So well done to Sky News for that. Look, for me, I don't go into elections other than hoping to win. I don't go into elections hypothecating a loss, so I'll go in there with the very focused aim of winning that general election. Yousaf was also asked about Scottish independence. It was put to him by the presenter that the controversy surrounding Nicola Sturgeon could be the death knell for the independence movement. The First Minister replied, "I don't believe that at all. What I believe is that, yes, the last couple of months have been extremely challenging for the SNP. Again, I'm not going to fool your viewers by denying that being the case. But when you look at that, even despite we've had the toughest few years probably in our party's recent history, support for independence is absolutely rock solid. So we've got that solid support for independence. My job is to make sure that when these matters pass, and they will pass, of course, that we continue to build on those strong foundations that have seen us elected by the people of Scotland election after election after election. The next national test, of course, will be that general election, and I've got every confidence that we will go into that hoping to win." That article was by Adam Robertson. From The National, Tuesday the 20th of June 2023, from the news section. Ofgem energy meter readings. Energy bills set to fall by £426, by Joshua Searle. The date you should take your energy meter readings ahead of the Ofgem energy price cap changes in July has been revealed. Ofgem has lowered the energy price cap by more than £1,200 for the average household in England, Wales and Scotland. The reduction will come into effect from July the 1st, with the price cap dropping from £3,280 per year to £2,074 per year to reflect the recent falls in wholesale energy prices. The lower cap will replace the government's Energy Price Guarantee, EPG, which currently limits the typical household energy bill to around £2,500. It means the average household will see their annual bill drop by £426. It is the first time prices have fallen since the start of the global gas crisis more than 18 months ago. However, it is important that households take a meter reading before the drop in the price cap on July the 1st. An updated meter reading will stop your supplier from estimating bills that aren't accurate to the amount of energy you have used. Taking a meter reading is still important, even though bills are dropping, as it will help you if you are disputing a bill in the future. The cap does not set the maximum a household will pay for their energy, but limits the amount providers can charge them per unit of gas or electricity, so those who use more energy will pay more. The standing charge, the roughly £300 paid each year by households just to access gas and electricity, has not been included in the cap and will not fall. Martin Lewis, founder of the website Money Saving Expert, welcomed the drop in energy price cap earlier this year. He said, "This will be a relief for many, yet most will still be paying more for their energy during the winter. This is because, apart from those with high use, the drop in the rates doesn't make up for the £66 per month state support people got until April, and most are on monthly direct debit, which means they pay the same in summer as winter. Overall, this leaves people still paying double or more what they did before the energy crisis hit in October 2021. The fact the state is paying far less than planned to support people's bills means there is some wriggle room here for targeted support for another hard winter, coming for those who are just above the benefits threshold, though I'm not holding out much hope that it'll happen." This article was by Joshua Searle. From The National, Tuesday the 20th of June 2023, from the news section. Recall petition. SNP candidate Katie Loudon urges voters to remove Margaret Ferrier, by Laura Pollock. The SNP's candidate in Rutherglen and Hamilton West is encouraging people in the area to sign the recall petition to remove MP Margaret Ferrier and trigger a by-election. The recall petition is now live, with signing stations across the South Lanarkshire constituency open for 6 weeks from this morning. If more than 10% of voters add their name to the petition, either in person or by postal vote, Ferrier will automatically lose her seat. The process was triggered after MPs backed a 30-day suspension from the Commons for the MP after her pandemic rule breaches and subsequent criminal conviction. Katie Loudon, the SNP candidate in the potential by-election, has said it is the first step in the road to the area electing a strong SNP voice at Westminster. Loudon said constituents in Rutherglen and Hamilton West have the opportunity to hold a by-election and elect an SNP MP who will stand up for them against this rotten Tory government. The first step in that process will be to sign the recall petition. In the face of Tory economic incompetence and the Labour Party looking more and more like a Tory tribute act, the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West need a strong SNP voice to speak up for them. The petition must be signed in person, and those signing it must present valid ID. Therefore, I am encouraging anybody who wishes to sign it to check their nearest point to add their signature. I look forward to encouraging constituents to sign the petition and reach the 10% threshold we need for a by-election to be called, and allow the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West to elect an SNP MP. Ferrier was found guilty of culpable and reckless conduct at Glasgow Sheriff Court in August 2022, after she admitted travelling on a train in September 2020 despite knowing she had COVID. The MP also spoke in the Commons and visited a number of locations in her seat, including a mass in St Mungo's Church and a bar in Prestwick, while waiting on the results of a COVID test. After the positive test came through, she lied to colleagues and said she had to go home to visit a sick relative. Ferrier posted a statement on her website on Monday urging constituents not to sign Scotland's first recall petition when it opens, as many voters had told her that they did not want a by-election. Ferrier said her record of work for her constituents spoke for itself. She wrote, "As an independent MP, my constituents are my top priority and always have been. The most important thing is that they are able to access the right support when they need it and be confident that their views are representative. My record speaks for itself in this respect. I do not have any desire or need to play into party politics, which inevitably distracts from constituency issues and the needs of local residents. While parties have already spent months arguing about their candidates for a by-election that has not even been confirmed, they have disregarded the very real issues faced by many in our community. That is why so many constituents have expressed to me that they do not want a by-election. That article was by Laura Pollock.
From the National, Thursday the 22nd of June 2023. From the Culture section, the story of Winnie Ewing's legendary Hamilton by-election win. Article by Hamish McPherson. It was November 1967 that Winnie Ewing won the Hamilton by-election to become the Scottish National Party's second MP. It was a truly historic victory which can be summed up thus. Before Winnie and Hamilton, the SNP had one member of the UK Parliament, Dr Robert McIntyre, who held the Motherwell seat for 84 days after a by-election in 1945. After Hamilton, the SNP has always been represented in the House of Commons. I will write further about Winnie, as I consider her to be one of the greatest Scottish women of recent decades. This column concentrates on the by-election. For those who want to delve more deeply into the subject, I recommend Professor James Mitchell's book Hamilton 1967, published by Luath Press. The by-election has to be put into context first. When Willie Wolfe came second in the West Lothian by-election in June 1962, the SNP began a resurgence. Party membership began to grow so that a record 15 candidates stood at the general election in 1964, which entitled the SNP to a 5-minute party political broadcast on September the 29th, 1965. In the March 1966 general election, the SNP took 5% of the Scottish votes, by far the party's best performance in a general election. Labour, however, took almost 50% of the Scottish vote and were by far the dominant force in Scottish politics. SNP membership stood at around 25,190 branches by the end of 1966, and, in March 1967, George Leslie came third in the by-election with 23.8%, while in the local elections, the SNP won seats across the Central Belt, many for the first time. Things were moving for the SNP, helped by the failure of the Labour government to maintain the economic boom of the early 1960s. A by-election was rumoured to be coming for Hamilton where, in a piece of sheer arrogance by Labour, the sitting MP Tom Fraser was allowed to resign to become head of the North Scotland Hydroelectric Board. Letting such a sitting MP resign was a grave piece of misjudgment by Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who, to be fair, was advised by his Scottish Party leaders that Hamilton was absolutely safe territory. More pertinently, Wilson also did not have a clue about the SNP's formidable candidate. No one outside the SNP did, and many in the party also did not know her. Winifred Ewing was 38 and the vivacious mother of 3 young children, as The Guardian described her. She had no real political experience and had not even held a council seat. Instead, she had made a career as a formidable lawyer and academic who, among other attainments, was a fluent Dutch speaker. Despite her lack of experience, this would be her first campaign, she won selection as prospective parliamentary candidate from the local branches in September 1966, and the National Executive endorsed her. When Fraser hinted he would resign in May 1967, the party locally was ready to fight the campaign. That month also saw a resurgence in Scottish feel-good factor as Celtic won the European Cup and Rangers reached the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup, while the previous month, Scotland beat world champions England at Wembley. In football, at least Scottish confidence was riding high, and it did feed into the national psyche. Much was made about the fact that Ewing was a woman standing in an area dominated by male politicians, but in fact Lanarkshire already had 2 female Labour MPs, the then current government minister, Judith Hart, and the formidable Peggy Herbison, who resigned as Minister for Social Security over the government's record on poverty in July 1967, adding to the feeling that Wilson was losing the plot. In the same month, Fraser resigned. The campaign was longer than usual for by-elections. In John McAteer, Ewing had an election agent of genius who would become the party's national organiser, and he put together a brilliant campaign strategy which involved Ewing emphasising SNP positivity and internationalism. The local branches in Hamilton, Lark Hall and Blantyre were constantly campaigning day and night, and party activists came from all over Scotland to work the streets and knock on doors. Mike Bradshaw of the Edinburgh Yes Hub recalls travelling to the constituency and being moved on by the police when he and fellow activists started a street sing-song that stopped the traffic. I felt we were going to win after that, he says. Labour's constituency party chose minor and local party stalwart Alec Wilson as their candidate. They rejected a certain John Smith, while the Tories selected lawyer Ian Dyer, and the Liberals did not even stand. Wilson didn't even bother to start his campaign until mid-October and took one day off work before the count. Though most of the debate was conducted in the press, Ewing impressed even the unionist media. Ewing's direct appeal to the public she met in the streets began to work. On every issue, Ewing wiped the floor with Wilson and Dyer, but on polling day, November the 2nd, 1967, the bookies had Labour as strong favourites. For once they were wrong, and Labour's complacency against a superb candidate and campaign haunts them to this day. Ewing polled 18,397 votes, or 46% of the vote, against Labour's 16,589 and the Conservatives' 4,986. The shot was felt all the way to Westminster, and the SNP was in business. "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on," Ewing famously said. Surely it's just a matter of time before we do exactly that. And that piece was written by Hamish Macpherson. From the National, Thursday the 22nd of June 2023, from the Culture section. Winnie Ewing, looking back at a lifetime of accomplishments. An article written by Aaron Burns-Lees. Winnie Ewing has died at the age of 93 after a lifetime of accomplishments in the Scottish independence movement. We look back at her historic political career. Winnie wins! On November the 2nd, 1967, Winnie Ewing won the Hamilton by-election, making her the second elected Scottish National Party MP in history. The contest was tightly fought, but Ewing beat out the bookies' favourite, Labour's Alexander Wilson, by almost 2,000 votes. It was an event that Professor Richard Finlay of Strathclyde University described as the beginning of modern politics in Scotland. She proved herself to be a mainstay of Scottish politics. Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on. On arrival in London after becoming an MP, Winnie Ewing told the press, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get back on." It heralded the foundation of a new attitude in the politics of Scotland and is perhaps the phrase she will be most remembered for. Winnie wins again. On April the 7th, 1979, Ewing lost her seat in Westminster, which she had held for 5 years. It took just 2 months for her to regain a parliamentary seat on June the 10th, this time as a member of the European Parliament. As an MEP, she gained the nickname Madame Écosse for her fervent and passionate advocacy for Scotland and Scottish interests abroad, in both France and Belgium. Reopening of Scottish Parliament. As the oldest qualified member of Scottish Parliament, it fell to Winnie Ewing to preside over the reopening of Scottish Parliament in 1999. This represents the culmination of more than 30 years in Scottish politics, with more to come until she stepped down as President of the Scottish National Party on July the 15th, 2005. She opened with a statement, "The Scottish Parliament, adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707, is hereby reconvened." An influential family. Winnie Ewing was the mother of 3 children, Fergus Ewing, Annabel Ewing and Terry Ewing. Fergus and Annabel are themselves significant figures in Scottish politics, with Fergus representing the Inverness and Nairn constituency in the Scottish Parliament, and Annabel holding the role of Deputy Presiding Officer. Her family are set to continue her legacy in the Scottish independence movement. And that article was written by Aaron Burns-Lees.
The National News on Wednesday the 21st of June. Inflation figures were unchanged in May, heaping further pressure on households. An article written by James Walker. The pressure on households from the rising cost of living did not ease last month, new figures have revealed, as inflation remained higher than expected. The Consumer Prices Index inflation stayed at 8.7% in May, the same level as in April, despite experts forecasting a fall to 8.4%. It means that people continue to face higher costs and is also likely to put more pressure on the Bank of England to raise interest rates even further. The Office for National Statistics said prices of plane tickets, entrance to live music venues and computer games had particularly hit households during the month. Meanwhile, the price of petrol and diesel fell compared with a year ago. Grant Fitzner, the chief economist of the Office for National Statistics, said, "After last month's fall, annual inflation was little changed in May and remains at a historically high level. The cost of airfares rose by more than a year ago and is at a higher level than usual for May. Rising prices for second-hand cars, live music events and computer games also contributed to inflation remaining high. These were offset by a fall in the cost of petrol. Food price inflation remains high, but the rate has eased slightly this month, with costs rising more slowly than the same time last year." The news is likely to put further pressure on interest rates. Decision makers at the Bank of England are meeting this week to look at the rates. The bank is tasked with keeping inflation as close to 2% as it can, and the best tool it has to do that when inflation is high is by putting up interest rates. But this is likely to pile even more pressure on mortgage holders, as rates are already at close to 15-year highs. Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson, said, "These worse-than-expected figures show the government is failing miserably to bring inflation down and provide relief for struggling families facing soaring bills. Homeowners now face the likelihood of even more interest rate hikes adding to their monthly mortgage payments, all while the Chancellor just sits on his hands." Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said, "We know how much high inflation hurts families and businesses across the country, and our plan to halve the rate this year is the best way we can keep costs and interest rate down. We will not hesitate in our resolve to support the Bank of England as it seeks to squeeze inflation out of our economy, while also providing targeted support with the cost of living." The Office for National Statistics said the Consumer Prices Index, including owner-occupiers' housing costs, rose to 7.9% in May, up from 7.8% in April. The Retail Price Index, which is used to calculate the rise in train fares, among other things, dropped from 11.4% in April to 11.3% in May. Commenting, SNP economy spokesperson Stuart Hosey MP said, "People are paying an unacceptable price for Westminster failure as UK inflation continues to soar, showing exactly why Scotland needs to escape Westminster control with independence. With worse inflation than the EU and the United States, it's clear Brexit and Westminster mismanagement are playing a devastating role in trashing the UK economy and increasing the cost of living for families, but neither the Tories or the pro-Brexit Labour Party will admit the truth and ditch their damaging Brexit obsession. The SNP is the only party offering real change with independence and real help with the cost of living. At the election next year, voting SNP is the only way to secure independence, escape Brexit and get rid of unelected Tory governments for good." An article written by James Walker. The National News on Wednesday, the 21st of June. Mother who smothered her baby with cling film jailed. An article written by Ross Hunter. A mother who killed her newborn son by smothering him with cling film has been sentenced to 8.5 years in jail. Inetta Zingovina, who is 38, was sentenced by Lady Poole at the High Court in Glasgow on Tuesday after she pleaded guilty to culpable homicide on the basis of diminished responsibility at an earlier hearing in Edinburgh. Paulius was just hours old when Ms. Zingovina placed a piece of cling film over his mouth and smothered him to death at her home in Fraserburgh in April 2010. She had previously been convicted of murdering him following a trial and sentenced to life with a minimum term of 15 years in jail in 2011, but this conviction was quashed in March by the appeal court. The Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission had referred her case to the appeal court after fresh evidence was obtained about her mental state at the time of her son's death, which showed she suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder after suffering years of domestic and sexual abuse. She has now effectively served her sentence, which was backdated to when she was first remanded in custody on April 15th, 2010. However, she faces a 15-year prison sentence in her native Lithuania for killing her newborn daughter Paulina in 2009 by wrapping her in a plastic bag and placing her in a cupboard. At the sentencing on Tuesday, Lady Poole told the court, "You had an upbringing characterised by neglect and then a troubled marriage." The judge said she had taken into account a criminal justice social work report and everything said in Ms. Zingovina's defence. Lady Poole continued, "You've had a very difficult life. In particular, your treatment at the hands of others prior to being imprisoned makes difficult reading. You have various issues with your health. You've been in custody since April 15th, 2010. In prison, you've engaged well, including with programmes offered to you. Although your culpability at the time of your offending was diminished by your mental state, the harm you caused was extreme. You took the life of your son Paulius. He was a newborn baby. You deprived your son of his life and all he could have been. After you killed Paulius, you hid his body in a bag amongst rubbish in the common stairway where you lived. Killing a defenceless baby is behaviour which society cannot tolerate. You must be punished for what you did." An article written by Ross Hunter. The National, on Wednesday the 21st of June. Opinion. Vote put a firm stamp on the end of Boris Johnson's political career. A column written by Iona Fife. MPs officially approved the Boris Johnson Partygate report with 354 aye votes against 7 no votes. As BBC correspondent Ione Wells offered immediate analysis and commentary, protesters in the background played a very slick pre-recorded "Bye Bye Boris" melody. It was the death knell to Mr Johnson's political career and reputation. The first time a former Prime Minister has been held in contempt of the House of Commons. It's out. Boris knowingly and deliberately misled Parliament. He lied to Parliament, colleagues, the civil service, nurses, doctors, firefighters, frontline workers and the wider public, showing nothing but contempt for the families of 227,000 victims who lost their lives to COVID. Last week, the official UK COVID inquiry saw families very publicly recounting and emotionally reliving their most painful memories of losing loved ones during the darkest days of the pandemic. As the inquiry reaches its second week, the release of new Partygate jingle and mingle footage has reinforced the fact that it was always one rule for the Conservatives and one rule for everyone else. As Martin Doherty-Hughes MP pointed out during the debate, this is personal. It's personal to every single person in the United Kingdom that died, or those who willingly changed their behaviour to protect the NHS, or who lost their entire livelihoods. The pandemic was the single most formative experience of my relatively short lifetime. I went from a busy freelancer, freshly graduated from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, to an anxious, depressed and shut-in person, terrified to leave the house in fear of catching COVID and exacerbating my already difficult-to-manage fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. Thankfully, I didn't lose a loved one. I didn't go through the traumatic pain of not being able to say goodbye to a dying parent or grandparent. But COVID changed my life, my relationships, the trajectory of my career, and my physical and mental health forever. With my family 194 miles away, I, like many others, spent Christmas 2020 alone. Strict lockdowns were enforced, with people requiring to be back home in time for Boxing Day. My health didn't allow me to undertake a 7-hour round trip just to spend a few hours with my parents. Earlier in the pandemic, I'd been in recovery from major reconstructive knee surgery. I couldn't walk far without crutches, but without proper access to physiotherapy or rehab, as all appointments were cancelled, I decided to start walking regularly. On one occasion, when sat down for a break in the park, I was swiftly moved on by 2 police officers, even after showing them my foot-long fresh scar on my leg. I became the most dejected, lonely and mentally broken person I had ever been, and was placed on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. I was given no understanding or compassion, and the Conservatives should be given zero understanding or compassion when we vote in the next election. Not only has Mr Johnson been found to have misled Parliament, but also of misleading the Privileges Committee. On having a sly wee peek at the report 4 days before its publication, Mr Johnson resigned as an MP with immediate effect, throwing the Tory party into more by-election chaos. But an overwhelming amount of attention still seems to be directed towards Margaret Ferrier. I cannot possibly defend the truly awful actions of Miss Ferrier, but the SNP did the right thing, immediately removing the whip from her. Yet Mr Johnson was allowed to continue his historically dreadful premiership for months after the original Partygate story broke. So what now? Mike Amesbury, MP, suggested that those who've received honours from the disgraced former Prime Minister should, in the interest and defence of the families who lost loved ones during the pandemic, return them. While there's a larger conversation to be had about the antiquated and archaic honours system and the House of Lords, I believe Mr Johnson should not only have his ability to dish out honours removed and his former members' pass revoked, but he should pay back every single penny of the £115,000 per year of public duty cost allowance that he gets, and receive no further payments. Mr Johnson knowingly and deliberately misled Parliament, and while it's a very little solace to those who lost loved ones, their health, or their livelihood during the pandemic, my goodness, it was high time that this crook was outed for the perpetual liar that he is. We're done with hypocrisy, we're done with the double standards, and I'm personally done with any commentator, media outlet, politician or human who can defend Mr Johnson and his cronies. Boris may believe that he outmanoeuvred himself and ended his political career on his own terms by resigning a week ago, but Monday night's vote truly put a firm parliamentary stamp on the end of Mr Johnson's political career. And the fact that the spineless Rishi Sunak was absent for the entire proceedings is another debate. A column written by Iona Fife, who's an award-winning Scots singer and musician. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 21st of June. SNP MP cleared of claims he bullied Nadine Dorries. An article written by Hamish Morrison. SNP MP John Nicholson has been cleared of accusations he bullied former Minister Nadine Dorries by a Westminster Standards panel. The party's media spokesperson successfully appealed an earlier finding of Parliament's Standards Commissioner, which found liking and retweeting unpleasant posts about the former Culture Secretary amounted to bullying and harassment. Ms Dorries accused Mr Nicholson of bullying after he had tweeted, liked or retweeted disparaging material about the Tory MP 168 times over a 24-hour period in November 2021. During that period, he had liked tweets which described Ms Dorries as grotesque, a vacuous goon, and as having been ragdolled by him during parliamentary exchanges, according to the new report published yesterday. Mr Nicholson's case has now been heard by a number of different parliamentary standards watchdogs, having first been referred to an investigator appointed by Westminster's Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, and then the Standards Commissioner who disagreed with the findings of the first official. The MP appealed the findings of the Commissioner to the independent expert panel, who announced yesterday that they had set aside the official's judgment and cleared Mr Nicholson of bullying claims. The panel said the Commissioner had failed to consider Mr Nicholson's tweets in the context of the political system, and that Parliament's bullying rules had to give regard for criticism and scrutiny of the government. Its report stated Mr Nicholson's actions could not properly be shown to have breached the bullying and harassment policy. That policy had to be interpreted so as not to preclude vigorous opposition to the government or vigorous defence of government policy and actions. Such is our political system. Parliament must have intended that the policy should be interpreted consistently with that system. Appeals of this type, the report noted, are commonly kept anonymous, but in this case the panel felt it appropriate to name both Ms Doris and Mr Nicholson because of the public nature of the spat. The report said this is a very unusual case under the bullying and harassment policy. The complainant and the respondent have had no private relationship, neither has been the employee of the other. They are neither of them colleagues, save that both were members of Parliament at the relevant period. The complaint arose entirely from their relationship as Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport and spokesperson on that portfolio for the Scottish National Party, respectively. During the relevant period, there were no private communications between them, written or oral. It added, the actions complained of have all been in public or published on Twitter. In an ordinary case, the published decision would maintain the anonymity of the complainant. However, that is impossible here. Both the narrative of events and the outcome would be incomprehensible otherwise. In any event, the identity of the complainant would be immediately apparent to any interested person, however bowdlerised an account of the facts was given. Ms Doris and Mr Nicholson were approached for comment. An article written by Hamish Morrison. The National News on Wednesday, the 21st of June. Top football bosses in brain injuries call to the government. An article written by Adam Robertson. A group of Scottish football managers are among those demanding that brain injuries caused by heading the ball are reclassified as industrial injuries. Former Aberdeen and Manchester United boss Sir Alex Ferguson, along with Alex McLeish, Gordon Strachan and Craig Levein, have signed an open letter to the Scottish Government. The Injury Time campaign is being led by Labour MSP Michael Marra, with the publication of the letter coming just days after the death of Gordon McQueen, who died aged 70 last week after battling with vascular dementia for 2 years. Mr McQueen's family is convinced that his condition was a result of repeatedly heading a ball throughout his career. A study published last week found that former professional footballers were 3.5 times more likely to develop dementia. The campaign has 3 key demands. Classify brain injury in football as an industrial injury and give ex-professionals access to the benefits and care they need and have earned. Fund more research into the practical and preventative support within the game at all levels. Establish a working group to consider the issues around brain injury and dementia, including in the grassroots and women's games. Former Scotland captain Alex McLeish said, "From winning the Cup Winners' Cup in Gothenburg in 1982-83 to managing Rangers and Scotland, football has been good to me. Making a living, running out in front of tens of thousands of people to help them make memories that will last a lifetime was a real privilege." However, Mr McLeish added that it was clear that playing the game has taken a huge toll on my former teammates and opponents. The head knocks they took primarily from heading the ball has left them much more likely to suffer brain injuries and neurodegenerative disease than would otherwise have been the case. This should be recognised as the industrial injury it is, and those boys who didn't retire into luxury should have the access to benefits and extra support they might need. Mr Marra said, "The science here is clear. Playing football has left our ex-professionals up to 5 times more likely to suffer brain injuries than the average person. The causal factor is their time on the pitch, playing our national sport and playing for our clubs. These injuries were sustained playing for us for our entertainment. We now have a duty to support those players and their families to live the best lives that they can." The Labour MSP added, "These players did not make fortunes from the game, very far from it. This was another age, but even today the average lifetime earnings of a professional footballer in Scotland remain low in terms of the population as a whole. By classifying brain injuries in football as an industrial injury, we give those players and their families access to the benefit and support they need. I'm incredibly grateful to those ex-players and managers who've signed this letter. This unprecedented intervention from the leaders of our national game shows that concern is growing and it demands national attention. They've led their clubs and country on the field, and now they're leading the way in supporting their friends and colleagues." An article written by Adam Robertson.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and tell your friends about our service.